Welcome to the Wild Rose Casino and Resort Studios for Cyclone Fanatic Podcast Network. This is Kickin It with Jeff, Woody, and Grant Mahoney. So welcome, Grant Mahoney. How you doing, buddy?
Good. Glad to be here. Glad to be here in studio with the Rob Gray as well.
Rob Gray, the grizzled
Much
veteran.
appreciated.
The grizzled veteran, Rob Gray.
Grizzled veteran, the Woodman. That's still one of my favorites, that call on that touchdown. The Woodman!
I don't think anyone has ever called me that in person other than you. Like,
Yeah.
I think that's the only...
I just remember the call when I went back and watched it, and I was like, they called him the Woodman.
And literally nobody else.
Roll with it.
The other weird nickname that I got. So with a name like Woody, there's a lot of different directions it can go.
Yeah.
A lot of different directions it can go. The weirdest one was Woodshed. That was Don Starcevich, who's a defensive coordinator at Sally Spoke, would call me Woodshed, which turned into Shed. So I don't know why that became the thing that we went to. So Woodman and Woodshed are the only two that like someone would actually call me that, but it's just one person that would call me that.
Not the direction I would go with the name Woody, but
There's a lot of drunk fans in the third row of the stands. They have called me many different things. Many of them are not really repeatable for microphones. First, before we get started, going to thank title sponsor. Again, we thanked Kelder Manufacturing in Oskaloosa for like straight up just point blank saying, hey, we'll sponsor this show. Woody and G-Mo and having no idea what the show's about. So thanks, Kelder Manufacturing. The Kelderman corn reel is the original down corn reel invented by Gary Kelderman back in 1977, but they bend the spokes in that corn reel so it works in standing corn. You have chickens. Do you have any crop at all?
I don't have any chickens. I do grow food in my garden, though. I've got some watermelon going. I got some unintentional Australian butter squash coming out of my compost pile.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that was from last year's.
Such a green thumb. You didn't even mean
A
to
lot
grow
of
it. It
others.
just
I got
happened.
strawberries. I love strawberries. Raspberries will put on a second crop soon. Enough about that, though. I don't want to dominate
Do you
the
need
podcast.
a Kelder Manufacturing combine
Not
attachment?
if I have the size of garden I'd want to have on my wish list, I absolutely would.
Well, if you do, they have mounts for damn near every combine head ever made. If they don't have it, they'll make it. The reason why is because these guys actually are farmers. So you can appreciate that someone in manufacturing who actually is a farmer is going to do a job right. So thanks for coming on, Rob. And thanks for
Absolutely.
Kelder Manufacturing.
My pleasure.
So to start, my last Thursday, and I was going to ask how you guys are doing, but I don't really care. So last weekend, what I went to is, so on Thursday, we went up to Madison, the CrossFit Games, just the World Championship of CrossFit. It's phenomenal. It's terrifically interesting. They start with 40 men, 40 women teams, adaptive divisions. So people that are missing a leg, hand, arm, whatever, they have fitness competitions for them. But the main show is the individuals, and they start with 40 men, 40 women, and they'll cut down to 30, and they'll cut down to 20, and there's 12 events. If you win an event, you get 100 points. If you get last in the event, you get 0 points. So you're trying to stack up as many points across the events as you can, and it's everything from cycling to weightlifting or whatever. And so you're there from 8 o'clock in the morning to like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock, sometimes 7 o'clock on one of the days, and you're just paying attention. You're just glued in to what these people are doing. From Thursday to today, things happened.
like what?
Jeff? So I'm at the games, and you go out to eat there's a group like 18, I think, of us from the gyms that we have that came up and went to the games, kind of go get dinner with have a couple beers and whatever, go home, check Twitter, and like, holy shit. So in the time between Thursday and
X.
today, X. It's X. It's not Twitter.
Yeah.
What do you think about the rebrand?
As generic as it could possibly be.
But you're still tweeting, right?
Are you tweeting
Well,
on X?
I call it tweets. I'm
you
never
Xing?
going to call it Xing.
Are you Xing on X?
Because that had a different connotation when I was in school.
And you still go to twitter.com if you just go from like a browser, I'm assuming.
I don't understand.
Elon Musk. Anyways.
I had to say it because it's
appropriate. No,
ridiculous.
you're correcting the branding. Thank you.
But yeah,
Thank you for that. We have to appease the internet overlords.
It's my job.
But we have, like, between Thursday and today, I remember seeing that. So Colorado's already safely in, got that. They're in the boat. They're rowing around. They're with the Big 12. So the Big 12 became the Big 13. So cool. Great. Now, in between Thursday and now, Arizona was added, and then they weren't, because the Pac-12 was going to sign the grant of rights, and everybody was all together. And then Oregon and Washington were all together, but they were flirting with the Big Ten, weren't serious. They were just flirting. They were talking. They're somewhere between flirting and dating. And then they go from not being part of the Big Ten to then being completely a part of the Big Ten. And then Arizona then says, I want to be a part of the Big 12. And all of a sudden, the Pac-12 is now 4 teams. The Big 12 is now 16 teams.
It was only 6 teams, and then Arizona State and Utah were like, wow, I'm going to join.
Yeah, I'm going to come on too. So it was
Kind of out of nowhere.
The Big 12 was 14, and then Arizona State and Utah were going to come, and they weren't going to come, and then they did come again. And now the Big 12 is 16, the Big 10 is 18, the Pac-12 is 4, and we don't know what to do with numbers. So what? I don't know if, like, we were talking about this before we recorded, Rob. The thoughts on realignment, because if you're going to listen to like how it happened or what actually like the logistical steps on this are, I legitimately think there is not a better source to go through than Chris Williams. And Brent is also really good because he understands TV contracts. So Chris and Brent, they did their Sunday pod was fantastic. Yeah. So the logistics, those are going to be off the table. At least it's not something that we're really going to be able to add too much of. However, as a writer, understanding the storylines, we were talking about this before, and like, yes, there is a sigh of relief that the Big 12 is on more stable ground. But there's also the other side of it where there's a potential for it to head not down a great direction. As a writer, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thought is I put myself in my fan position, which I can't do, obviously, and I'm reporting on the team as a professional. But I don't. I think that there's a danger that college football eventually will become such a super league type of situation that a lot of rank and file fans that aren't already fans of some of those said super teams that really get invited to the club will lose interest. And I mean, I'm just looking at it from a. Do you guys watch Ted Lasso?
Yes, of course. Who doesn't?
The guy came in. He was going to form the Super League. He's offering them all the money, how much more money they're going to make, and then of course, you got to. When Rebecca injects I don't want to do this to my fans. I don't want to do this to our fans. It's bad for the sport. It's this and that. And I think that's the danger. I mean, frankly, I was hoping, from a perspective of college football overall health with the fan bases and everything, even including the money, that it would have ended with Colorado and adding another school in the Pac-12 would have held together. Because the idea of that conference not existing, I don't think that's good for the sport. You lose that entire tradition. And you got to balance tradition with money. And what's funny is a lot of the people who are at the president level and on up, university president and TV, they sort of talk about survival. And as Brent and Chris talk about, the so-called cable companies, which are not cable companies anymore, the ESPNs, the Fox, excuse me, they're kind of tapped out. So streaming is going to become more of a necessity for the sport. So, they talk about survival, though. And when it's really kind of like a story of greed to me. And it's probably a mixture of both. But I just think in terms of a storyline, I think, what is it? Are fans of Washington State a considerable part of that money picture? No. Or is Iowa State, not necessarily. I mean, but having a lot of fan bases disaffected and feeling like they are so far removed. I mean, let's face it, the Big 12 now has emerged as what, the top have-not conference, where the Big 10 and the SEC are the haves. I think the Big 12 keeps that interest because they feel more involved. And you got a whole other idea when the playoffs expand, you've got, 6 guaranteed conference. What does that look like? I mean, it feels stable, but it's still entirely unstable. And at some point, people, I think, get disillusioned and jump off and think like it's the NFL. And if they don't have a team in the NFL, they don't care about it.
Go ahead. I mean, I think it's interesting you talk about, the college football playoffs, because where my mind was kind of going is bowl games are already kind of being diluted, and they don't really, you have your superstars are sitting out,
which is a completely justifiable thing. Like if I was a potential first round pick in the NFL, and I'm playing in anything less than like the Cotton Bowl, like I wouldn't play. Like when Brees didn't play back when Iowa State was playing Clemson, you shouldn't.
Yeah. But like, I guess where I was going is that like the tie-ins, which the tie-ins are also kind of, not really set in stone, but the Rose Bowl has such a history of, usually it's Pac-12 and Big Ten. Well,
yeah,
when the Pac-12 is gone, what are they going to do? And I don't know what the future looks like for college football playoffs, but I have to imagine that, kind of all the alliances where, the Rose Bowl, for instance, I got to imagine that those are just gone. And then, the big 4 or 5 games are just a part of the playoffs. We kind of see, a new landscape of major college football games or college football playoff games and bowl games.
Yeah, I think the other thing that was interesting about this, and I had talked about this on a podcast with Jared a while back, which I think there's 2 things that come to mind in this, and I mentioned this last week, which is again one of my the funniest quirks of people are when perfectly rational individual decisions make terrible decisions for the group. And the example on this would be like, I want to go to the, you're at the CrossFit Games. It's, 9,000 people in an arena, and you have like 12 minutes between event 2 and event 3. And so like everybody has to pee at that time. And so a perfectly rational individual decision is if you just walk up to the bathroom and you just walk and you kind of push somebody out of the way and get to the urinal because there could theoretically be a urinal open. Well, that makes sense for you to do that because you have to pee. There's a urinal that you could get to. But if every single person had that same thought, then you have a mass brawl trying to get to the urinals, and there would just be piss everywhere. There's other consequences happen. But it's one of those things.
And you cannot share urinals too. Well,
I mean, you could.
They had some of those trough. They have some of those trough
That's
ones
true.
in
Like
stadiums.
the pee trough, like back in I think Sec Taylor had that for a while. Or
I think even Jack Trice Stadium did. I mean, that was fairly common in a lot of places.
I'm old. I can't imagine why
you
that
guys
left.
aren't old like me.
I can't imagine why that didn't exist anymore.
I personally enjoy standing shoulder to shoulder, peeing next to someone into a trough.
So, and you'll just do that sometimes. Just walk up to a farm and just stand next to a horse and just pee in a trough. I don't know.
That's a farm.
But the interesting thing is that like the perfectly rational individual decisions make for bad group decisions, and this feels like one of those moments where a rational individual decision by a university or by a conference is a negative for the whole. But the problem is, and I would say this might be an optimistic take, not say the problem, the situation going forward is that there is a breaking point where that goes too far and the whole thing falls apart. And I think there will be enough cracks in that, and there will be enough bad response to it to make it not worth it. So what I mean by this is that like the Big 12, the Big 10, the SEC, they are the stable conferences now. They're the ones that you can trust. Those teams that are in there are reasonably financially secure. I read an article, I think it was by Doctorman actually, it's either Doctorman or Mandel, that wrote about Rutgers, and their finances may or may not be all that on good standing. But for the most part, the schools in those leagues are on good footing. And so they can feel like they are on good footing. Well, the ACC and the Pac-12, obviously whatever's left of the Pac-12, kind of can't. So they then are thinking sort of cannibalistically, and they're trying to survive, and the Big 12 is trying to survive, and whatever's trying to survive. But they do what's best for the Big 12, which is then trying to compete against the Big 10, to compete against the SEC, and to compete against whatever. And all this competition doesn't actually make for a better product. It makes for a more competitive, antagonistic league that you're only looking out for, making sure that it exists. That is how the current moment exists. If this progresses further in this lane, I think, Rob, you were mentioning, is you start to get the point where a super league becomes a reasonable discussion of where you have Ohio State and Michigan and Alabama and Georgia and LSU, and the list is pretty short on that. But the majesty of college football is that it's the transitive property of giving a shit, which is let's use the example of Washington State when Iowa State was playing was in the Alamo Bowl against Washington State. I couldn't give a rat's ass about Washington State up until the fact that it was possible or plausible that Iowa State was going to play Washington State in the Alamo Bowl. So because I care about Iowa State, Washington State matters to Iowa State, thereby transitive property, I care about Washington State. If the initial link in that chain of it matters to my team, if that link is gone, then the entire fan base falls apart. House of Cards, whole thing's gone. Because if you're just looking to watch the best football, you watch the NFL. There are better players. There's better teams. The guys understand they're professionals. There's not any risk of them like you don't feel guilty at all. There's no other feeling. It's like Patrick Mahomes is a really good freaking player. I'm going to watch Patrick Mahomes play. And you don't worry about what's going to happen from that, or you don't think about anything like that. So if you're going to do a super league with Ohio State, Michigan, and LSU and whatever, and it doesn't involve 90% or 80% of the schools across the country, 80% of the country isn't going to care. And I think that's where there is enough, even if you're taking that perfectly rational individual decisions, if you're taking those rational individual decisions to that point, it will stop making individual sense when the whole thing falls apart, because there won't be enough advertising revenue. There won't be enough eyeballs to come back in, because when you lose, I mean, Iowa's probably on the borderline of existing that. So you lose Minnesota, maybe on the borderline of that. Missouri's not. Indiana's not. So you lose basically the state of Missouri, the state of Iowa, the state of Illinois, the state of Indiana. You lose all of those all those states, the entire population center of those states, and they're not watching. It doesn't matter. So I think what's probably going to be more of a reasonable thing to happen than one super league is actually, again, perhaps too optimistic, is you get a diverse representation of who all is in the field. So Oregon State might make it back into this pile. Washington State might make it back into this pile. It's that Power Five breaking off, because with this combative relationship between the Big 12 and the Pac-12, or the Big 10 and the Pac-12, and the ACC and the SEC, and stealing schools, and the Big East dying, and the Pac-12 dying, and all that kind of stuff, because there's no commissioner, there's no organizing body that makes those rational decisions make more sense together. So eventually there will be I think there's going to be a break off of those Power Five leagues. And then from there, in order to get the best TV dollars, Kansas State and Iowa State has to still exist. Iowa and Wisconsin has to still exist. Ohio State, Michigan has to still exist, because I don't care if we are playing Michigan State. It's a big brand. Doesn't matter. There's no history. There's nothing to it. So at some point, it doesn't seem like any other feasible way for this thing to exist, except in X number of years when the TV contracts and whatever are up. There's a big pot of schools that comes in, somewhere between 40 and 60 or 65. They break off. They have a commissioner of some sort that's overseeing all that. They do the negotiations for, like the NFL does with AFC, NFC, where the AFC is on CBS, the NFC is on Fox, the Sunday night games on NBC, and you have Monday Night Football on ESPN. All those things like check off. They just bargain them out, but then it all comes back to the NFL, and the better product rises everybody. So it feels like that is the next major shift that would happen, is when everybody gets together, and then at that point you resegment based on regional geography and historical stuff. So it feels like right now it is an awkward teenager that has pimples all over its face, like giant hands, gobbly ass knees. Doesn't look good right now, but it will eventually mature into something that is what it should be, or what it has, or what it should have been. But there's going to be a lot of crap in the way, and there's a lot of wrong choices that you can make in order to get there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think too that, it's always the shiny new thing that people like. And so like Iowa State playing BYU, like, oh, that's so cool. Iowa State going to Houston, whatever. So like, yeah, I think it's gonna be really fun for the first few years. But then I think, like you said, the cream's gonna rise to the top, and people are gonna want to see, the SEC and the Big Ten and kind of form a super league. So then does it become, what we have now as a Power Five? Is that kind of the new Power Five? And then it's almost, 3 or 4 levels where it's like the super conference, the Iowa States of the world, the Oregon State, Washington State of the world, and then like the UNLVs, like kind of the 4 different tiers. And then the UNI, like the FCS level. Well,
I just don't think that there's going to be enough care. Like, I don't think if I don't have a shot, if my team doesn't have a shot, then what's the point?
You see that in bowl games too. I mean, if your team's not playing, in one of the New Year's Six games, like we'd mentioned, not only all your superstars not playing, no one really cares.
Yeah, I'd have to say as an aside, Jeff, I give you the best athlete award for analogies. It goes all the way back to your playing days, and you managed to turn it into a bathroom analogy. I could think of a traffic analogy too, like if you're in LA. And I've been there a number of times since my sister lives there.
It is terrifying on the highways.
But I posit that drivers there are more likely to let people in on an exit than drivers on I-235 because they've been there their whole lives. They know what it means. They don't angrily decide, I'm not letting someone in. People get let. I didn't have to drive. I was driven, but I was paying attention to. It's like, oh, they got to merge. They're 4 cars back. Well, people just let people in. I mean, yeah, some people drive like maniacs, but they know that it'll grind to a halt or have a massive pile up if they drive like, I got mine. I'm not going to let you in.
Again, which would be justifiable. Like it's a justifiable individual decision if you're saying like, I will get there faster if I do not let this person in.
But eventually you will come to a halt because everyone is going to be doing that.
Right.
And they recognize that because that's been their normal for so long. Whereas for all the people in Des Moines, it hasn't always been the normal for people that move in, and maybe lived, in a smaller town or something. So that's my contribution to the analogy thing without the color. Without the color. But I mean, I also want to say that we're almost at the Super League point already. Yeah. I mean, the Big Ten and the SEC, you just have 2 instead of 1. I mean, they've so separated themselves financially from the others. And the Big 12 is, I mean, what I worry about also, and I think the transitive property is great. All fan bases would become, outside of the Super League, would become like mid-majors in college
you become
basketball.
Ball State.
That's kind of what I was getting at.
So it's like we got a chance if we can win the conference to get in there. But then what are your resources like? I mean, we haven't talked about how NIL affects all this. And I mean, that could even affect whether star players sit out bowl games. I mean, at some point. Yeah. But, and then does the Pac still have, do they try to get teams from the Mountain West? Do they go into the Mountain West? We've already seen really weird stuff like Stanford and Washington, or not Stanford and Cal becoming part of the Atlantic Coast Conference. I mean, it all becomes absurd at some point, right?
Yeah.
And I think people, to what you said, you've got to maintain those regional rivalries any way you can. And it doesn't have to be in conferences. Iowa and Iowa State have proven over the years. Excuse me. Without that glue, it does become, Alabama's playing who?
Right.
Why? It's like week 7 and the Patriots are playing the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. And I think
unless you're a fan of the team, you don't care.
Right. And that's where like every professional sports league is divided into regional divisions. I mean, you think about it, the NFL is the NFC North, East, South, and West. Yep. The AFC North, East, South, and West. The NBA has the East, has the Atlantic and the whatever the 2 divisions are, the North and South, Eastern Conference. And then like the little subdivisions in there, because then you have the Bucks playing the Bulls, and that matters. You have the Lakers playing the Warriors, and that matters. You have the Knicks playing the Celtics, and that matters. And the regionality of that is what makes sports. Because one of the things, if you think about this whole thing that we're doing, we have this beautiful studio. Thank you to the Wild Rose Casino Studios and Nebraska Furniture Mart for furnishing this. We have this beautiful studio to talk about games. It means nothing. But so if you think about it rationally, it doesn't make any sense why this exists. Which is why like the USFL and the XFL and like the Birmingham Stallions and whatever, those teams have had such a hard time catching on, is because you can't just start fandom. It doesn't make sense. There is no rationality to it. You don't, like, I've asked this before. So I'm sort of pro team agnostic. I kind of just root for the guys. Like probably this year, I'm going to root for the Jets. And like, I really like the storyline if the Bills were to win a Super Bowl, just because they're, the history of that, whatever. Like
what about the Vikings? They've never done it.
They still have Kirk Cousins, but they have, but like I'm sort of like just root for teams. But like, are either of you guys ardent fans of a NFL team?
I grew up a big Vikings fan, and since my dad was a Packers fan, it made me pretty. Unless I cover the Vikings, then I can't be a fan. But I don't cover them, so I'm like Chris, a big Vikings fan.
So why? Like, what about the Vikings are you actually rooting for? So like, this is again like
nearby,
because they're nearby.
You see more games,
and you see more games. But Dalvin Cook may or may not be a Viking. And so we like them when they're on our team. And then we go to a different team, we don't like them. And then the whole roster changes and the coach changes. And like the Washington Commanders, they sold to a different ownership group. So it's completely different. Like the building and the uniforms are more or less the same, and that's it. And why would someone be a lifelong Chiefs fan or lifelong Vikings fan or lifelong whatever? It doesn't make rational sense. And so when you're looking at sports through the lens of an administrator or of a TV executive or whatever, and you're thinking of it as in, Alabama draws well usually. Well, it's because Alabama's playing LSU. That matters. Oh, Texas usually draws well. Well, it's because it's Texas versus Texas Tech. That matters. Oh, USC draws really well. All of a sudden, Stanford sucks for a few years, and there's 37 people that go to a Stanford game, and no one tunes in. So there's the fickleness of that is it can very quickly dissipate. And that's why I do think that we're going to reach a saturation point where the TV money isn't going to return what it needs to, because it's going to be so disturbed through these Cal Berkeley in the ACC, Cal versus Wake Forest. Mm-hmm. I couldn't care less. So I think we will reach a saturation point where that doesn't, where you can't just pluck a team and say they're going to play there, even as business air quotes focused as you might be.
Well, I think too, like the TV deals is going to be great. They're going to bring in money, but like the downside of it is, Iowa State, if they're playing Utah or BYU, like not as many Utah or BYU fans are going to show up to Jack Trice as Iowa fans or even Minnesota fans. And so that's kind of the sad part for me is I was hoping that if we were to go to, a super league or just a major league, that kind of the Big 12 and the Big 10 would merge. And maybe at some point in the future we get back to more regionality, because it would be so much better if a game was within driving distance, so many more fans from both teams to be able to go to the games. And like you mentioned, if Stanford joins the ACC, are people from Clemson going to come to Stanford? Probably not. And Stanford doesn't have anybody showing up anyway. So it's like, who's going to beat these games? And they're getting paid, X amount of dollars for the TV deal, but it's going to be so boring to watch the game on TV when the stadium's empty, the crowd's not into it. And it's like, I don't know. I feel like we're losing what makes college football great. Rivalries in the Pac-12 are essentially gone. I mean, that's the best part of college sports, And so for me, it's fun to see we are progressing, and it's fun to see that we are combining leagues, but at the same time, it's also sad because regionally, not as close, and rivalries, I guess new rivalries could be formed, but the reason there are mostly rivalries because of history. Mm-hmm. And so if, Iowa State and BYU have no history.
Other than Melvin Edgewood getting punched in the face and flipping off a crowd, which happened.
DeAndre Kane with
the hard foul. Yeah.
I just want to, they can maintain the regional rivalries non-conference wise, but that's still different traditionally. And when you were talking about nobody caring about, I'll just use a different analogy. Maybe Virginia Tech's playing USC. They wouldn't care because in conference it doesn't make sense because of regional. Everyone's used to that. But that is an interesting non-conference game. You know what I mean? So they have to preserve some of the pillars of tradition and history in order for this all to work. And it's a matter of, is that at the forefront, or is it the dollar signs that's always at the forefront? And I'd say usually in America, the dollar signs are at the forefront. And they say, well, we can figure out the tradition stuff later. If all those things become vestiges of the past, and it is all just these weird matchups like you guys have brought up, that's where the sport really gets in trouble. And it's really, on a slight tangent, it's an complete aberration. Like there is no college sports that people care about anywhere in the world except the United States, because they have clubs. They separate it out. They still get academics, but they've identified the people who are the best athletes, and they go and they play on the U16 team, the U15 team, the U17, U18. And that's why it must seem bizarre to people from Europe and other countries that they have college sports, and it makes how much money, and people go and root for them like we root for our football teams, our soccer team. It's an odd duck of a model to begin with. So they really need to be very careful about how they decide what's best moving forward. Because again, you lose the things we were talking about getting lost. I think it becomes almost untenable financially. People will have gotten theirs, but then you've got just a product that, like I said, very few people care about.
And I trust that even the people that are in the quote suits making the decision, I think they recognize that is the secret sauce to a point where you can't just throw the whole thing out, because if you try and push it and push it and push it and push it and push it, eventually it's going to break. So I do think that a reasonable business person is going to look at this and understand that there is a threshold to this where if it gets pushed too far, then it doesn't work. And then you don't make your money back, in which case it's a poor business decision. And at that point, you're a stupid business person. And I think that hopefully most of the people the people that are running the show are going to end up in that situation.
And I know we're primarily a football podcast, but the new Big 12 is going to be one hell of a basketball conference.
It already was.
Yeah.
And now,
It just got better. Oh, man.
It's, that's a great byproduct of this. Obviously, football drives the money decisions like 98%, but
Will
men's basketball has a big, and
basketball
women's
make up the
basketball had
difference?
some women's basketball, really good teams as well. There is an element of fun to the newness, like you talked about, and new rivalries can be foreign, but the meaning of rivalries is lost if all the old ones go away.
Yeah.
And like you said, I think they're smart enough that they try to maintain those one way or another. Arizona State, Washington State, maybe they play week 2. Some of the other rivalries can be maintained that way. But another thing, aside of how the bigwigs make the money work, the institutions are going to be stretched. UCLA wanted to go somewhere else because they're in debt. The Pac-12 4 teams apparently owe Comcast for the overcharging thing that happened. You're already seeing institutes talk about the travel cost. USC and UCLA going to New Jersey
Or Maryland.
or even Iowa.
Yeah.
They're far flung for almost every game. And Arizona State coming to the Ames or Morgantown. They're going to incur bigger costs. And, so you get more money up front without really knowing exactly how the cost structure is going to come out. So, like I said, smart people will make rational decisions that aren't just self-interested.
One would hope.
Or else,
Yeah, one would hope. And I think there is I don't know, do you have anything more on realignment, like any other thoughts?
I would just kind of touch on the last one I would say is, the cost of travel, that also plays into it. Whereas, if Iowa State were to join a conference with Minnesota, you're not paying as much to travel there as US. So I don't know. It's exciting, but for me, it's also kind of sad.
Yeah. And so I think another thing that I don't want to say it's not even a good transition, but from exciting to weird. So one of the main reasons we wanted Rob on here, one is to kind of let Rob actually, re-ingratiate himself back to the Cyclone Fanatic crew that he has been gone for
a couple years,
17 years. So I wasn't able to get to Media Day. Grant didn't go to Media Day. Rob did get to go to Media Day. So to color this a little bit, for Media Day, how it normally works. And so I think talking about how it normally works versus how it worked on Friday, because again, I was gone from Thursday to Sunday. All of this happened. So I'm just catching up on this on like the drive home as Aaron, my wife, is kind of reading through whether it's Instagram or Facebook and saying, here's the things that happened. So how this normally works is Media Day is usually on a Friday. It's usually a Friday afternoon. Well, Friday morning sometimes.
Yeah.
I think Friday morning sometimes. But you'll have reporting, or you'll report for camp on like a Monday or a Tuesday, and you'll do your first few practices, and they have an acclimatization period. I think that's the acclimatization, where you have like it's helmets, shells, then you can go full pads or something like that.
And what is shells?
So shells means helmets and shoulder pads, where you're wearing shorts with like thigh protectors, but you're not actually allowed to tackle because you're not full padded. So shells that's predominantly how you practice, like especially during the majority of the year, because tackling is inherently dangerous just because someone's going to land on somebody else. So you very rarely practice full pads, but in camp you will practice full pads, at least some. But because going from not hitting someone to hitting someone, the pads are heavier. You're not sure where your hands, like where you're going to block somebody is different when they're wearing a set of shoulder pads when they're not. So it's safer for people to acclimatize into those. So I think it's 5 practices where you have to go helmets only. And also, fun fact, when I told my wife this, just generally like helmets only, she was like, you guys are wearing pants, right?
Just the helmet.
Just the helmets. Nothing else. Not even.
Standing shoulder to shoulder at a trough.
At a trough with just helmets. But it's like helmets only, and you're wearing your practice jerseys and whatever, and then shells. And usually that's like helmets only Tuesday, helmets only or Wednesday, shells Thursday, shells Friday, and then you're kind of getting ready to go full pads like Friday night or Friday morning, depending on when you actually set that up for media day. And then Saturday, you're doing it again. Like you're into 2-a-days by that point. And media day was always really fun because by that time, you would have already done 3 or 4 straight, like 14-hour days where it's like you have breakfast report at 6:30. And then you're going to go from 6:30 to 7:30 for breakfast. Then 7:30 to 8:15, you have treatment if you have an injury. And then from 8:15 to 9:45, you have meetings where you're going to watch film on install. And then you're going to go do a walkthrough from 9:45 to 10:15. And then you're going to practice from 10:15 to 11:30. And then you're going to shower and have lunch at noon. And then from 12 to 1:30, you're eating lunch. And then you're going back and taking a 5-minute nap. Then you're back for the second practice. And then 1:30 to 2:30 is treatment, and 2:30 to 3:30 is film, and all that. I mean, it's up until it was like 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. is basically your 2-a-days schedule. And by the time you get to Friday, you would have had 3 or 4 2-a-days, but you haven't practiced much full pads. I kind of describe it as like you would have reached the point where the bow is drawn back, and like once you get to media day, the bow is released because it is full pads, 2-a-days, like hard from that point forward. So it's kind of the last little, like, all of us are friends right now. Because once you get to the middle of camp, we're not friends anymore. Like, imagine being, I don't know if you had the same feeling, but it's sort of like being on a road trip with your brother for like 3 weeks. Like for the first week and a half, you're like, this is fun. And the last 2 weeks that you're like, I'm going to slap you if you look at me again. Did you have the same feeling during camp?
No, because our days weren't quite that
You're a
long.
dick.
Yeah.
You're such a dick.
When you said 5-minute nap, I was like, oh, your naps are only 5 minutes. Film? What is film?
We're supposed to watch ourselves kick? I thought we were just supposed to go out and kick. But like by the time you get to media day, it does feel like it's the sort of, I don't want to say the last bit of fun, but like it's silly because you are dressed in no shoulder pads, your game pants with no pads underneath them, and your game jerseys to do team pictures. So it looks absurd. Like,
and the jerseys fit weird without pads in them.
Yeah, because like they're extra puffy shoulders.
Yeah.
And like they're super tight during, like in the chest. So you have to like constantly pull it down. Otherwise you get this like weird bunch up underneath there. Mm-hmm. So you're walking, it looks absurd. And for us, you come out, you do like individual pictures. You'll do like position group pictures. So you get all the running backs together. You get all the special teams guys together. And then you do the team picture. And then after the team picture is when we talk to Rob. Because then you guys get to come out in the field and it's just like a free-for-all. So from your perspective, do you have a list of people, like on a normal media day, do you have a list of people that you want to talk to? Or you just go like, oh, look, KO's available. I'm going to go talk to KO.
I usually have a list and, an outline of some form because media days, sometimes you're not going to get access to certain players, younger players, for instance. I mean, now they have Campbell has the no true freshman talking rule that it changes things a little bit, but so there's always a plan. You want to have your main story and a notebook for the day covered. That's your main priority. But then you're thinking, I could do a feature on this player, this player, this player. Something else is going on. There's some issue. I could talk to people about that. An assistant about, if there's a new assistant, maybe you start working on a feature on them. So you're laying the groundwork for things to come. And I remember the all accesses. Even sometimes we were starting when they were still doing pictures. So you had to wait for some people of some position groups, pictures, team,
You got linebackers getting done. You're like, oh, I'm waiting to talk to AJ. Okay, yeah, you go to the picture. I'll be here when you get back.
Yeah. And inevitably you'd miss a person or two that you wanted to get just because of all the moving parts. They're getting pulled for, the media photographers or TV. And then they finally get back. That even happened with 7 guys. A couple guys, there was a TV tent and a print tent. They were print, internet, whatever we call this
Writers.
stuff now. Yeah, writers, content creators.
Ooh, you're a content creator.
That's demeaning. But so some writers went into the TV tent. I followed the rules. So a couple of the guys that came, once they were done with the TV tent, came over and sat down in the writer tent. And if they weren't talked to in 2 minutes, they're gone. So I think I talked to 5 guys. But, understand. So it was weird. I mean, if you want me to expand on that. I mean,
and that's I did want to get you on it because this media day, like the setup of this media day was way different because that carnival atmosphere that Grant and I got to be a part of where team pictures. Like I remember there was one year where they just gave Jacquez a camera.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And then
And a small microphone, I think.
and a very tiny microphone to go.
Just interview
his
guys,
own
interview guys on the team.
interviews.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was for Cyclone.tv.
Yep.
And it was just like, here, Jacquez, you're good at talking. Go talk. And so like there's that carnival atmosphere, that kind of fun stuff about it. And on Friday, and like due to all the stuff that's swirling, which the gambling stuff, I think the first swing of the bat has come through. There are more swings of the bat to happen. I don't know who's going to be hit by it. I don't know what the severity of it is, but there's more stuff going on. And then with the realignment stuff, there's obviously stuff they don't know about it. Like Matt Campbell's probably not privy to those discussions. It's probably like, this is happening, just wanted to let you know. Like, it's not, what do you think about this? It's probably, you get on a conference call with, Fenley, TJ, whatever, those people, and like, hey, we're talking to Arizona State. It's good chance that Arizona State and Utah are going to be joining for the 2024 season. What questions do you have? This is happening. Like, I imagine that's what it is. So they can't answer those questions. So this year, it was just Campbell and 7 guys. No carnival. What was that like this year relative to years past?
It was, extremely difficult to do the planning part. I mean, you could still figure out. Usually, I wrote a main part because of the recent news. What it was 2.5 days earlier that the information about Hunter Deckers with the Iowa DCI probe came out, and I think that's the main reason Campbell wanted it to be buttoned up. I guess I'll go into explanation before I say what it was like, because he wanted to be the front man. He didn't want even. I personally, I don't quite understand the no assistance situation because we don't usually get them that frequently too. So we would in the past sometimes get the OC and DC obviously during the week at some point, and who knows what it'll be like going forward. But I can understand him wanting to be like, with all this stuff, I want to be the guy to say what I can or can't say, and he laid that out and did a rare opening statement as well. So I can understand that. Now, obviously, it makes it more difficult for us to write, I guess, really creatively, because when your source material is limited, it's that becomes impossible. But I understand why Campbell did it, and I think it was completely precipitated. Just my opinion. I didn't ask him about it, but by the situation with Hunter and obviously. Sauser, who just voluntarily left the team since, and all the other stuff, that he didn't want the potential for those players to have to be subjected to, hey, what's it like not having blank here? Or, I got any comment? Did you do, So he brought out guys he knew had talked before. Obviously, 4 of them, I think, had been at Big 12 Media Days. So, 58% of the offering? So they knew how to, handle this stuff. And so I get that. But does it make it more difficult for us? Yes. I mean, it made me do some things, like I reverted back to some of the old questions I would ask, like just to see whether I could find a kernel or a nugget of something for a feature on one of those guys that I talked to going forward. Like, first time you picked up, I always picked up a football. What was it like? 'Cause sometimes you'll get a story like, oh, I was terrible. I didn't even want to play. I love playing baseball. So you find something that you can work from for a feature that's beyond, hey, you went 16 for 28 passing last week, and hey, you ran for 88 yards and a touchdown. What's that like? Yeah. So, I was talking to Aiden about it, and I was like, it's kind of like you're a fisherman. You just throw something out and see if there's a bite. And you get some nibbles, and sometimes you get a real bite. And sometimes they're just like, nah.
In which case, you
not interested.
Leave that on the floor.
Not interested. But so it didn't. The vibe wasn't bad. I mean, there was no feeling of tension, I don't think, although clearly, I mean, I'd imagine the amount of tension Matt's feeling is pretty high, because you talk about a guy that he always says you want to control the controllables. Well, there's a big uncontrollable from a criminal probe that's now done, but now an NCAA probe, which will impact the team further.
And I would imagine listeners have probably heard rumors of what else is coming down the pike, but those are just rumors.
Yes.
And I would imagine he is privy to slightly more information, but still not a full throw of information. Like, I think the severity of what Deckers allegedly had done was new to everyone. I don't think anybody was like, yeah, we knew he was betting on games or on Iowa State. I don't think anybody knew that. I mean, when you get the thing, there's some dumb rules that the NCAA has, and there's some good rules that the NCAA has. Not betting on your own games is one of those good rules that should not exist. And so I would imagine with Campbell, trying to get in front of as much, and you mentioned like there's a big uncontrollables that like because of that, you go, the hell else is coming?
Yeah. I mean, and people don't like to hear it when he said, "Hey, I know you guys got a job to do, and I respect that, but I can't comment on things that are currently being investigated." The whole you could be in legal trouble if you comment on.
Yeah.
Now with the NCAA, that's a little bit hazier, but the DCI stuff that just come out, is that investigation over? They did say that there would be no more. That was it in terms of Iowa State, and for some reason you and I wasn't part of the mix, but that's a discussion for another day. Or Simpson, anybody who competes under the aegis of the NCAA, whether it's Division 1, 2, or 3. But at any rate, I guess to circle back, it was weird, but I guess it was necessarily weird. It's Campbell's in a difficult spot, and I think he, except for injuries, I think he likes to always be very upfront.
Yeah.
And take something on head on, and he because of ongoing investigations, he couldn't really do that. So he was blunt about that as he could, and he still got asked questions about it, and he answered those to the best of his ability without, treading into any dangerous territory. So it was a good media day, but extremely weird to not. And they had already curtailed it a little bit to select players, but it was not a select 7. It was a select like 20, maybe. I mean, so yeah, a different kind of day, but not a bad day, other than the fact that it's in the wake of some bad news, with probably some lesser bad news forthcoming down the road.
Yeah.
I think that I think that this year Campbell is going to be very tight-lipped, because I think it's a very pivotal year.
As opposed to his normal
very
talkativeness?
loose-lipped. Yes. Very, yes. I knew Hunter Deckers was the game. No. Because he's coming off a 4-8 season. There's a lot of unknowns with, new coaches, a lot of young guys that last year was their first year playing, a lot of young guys who'll be their first time playing this year. So I think, in my opinion, I think that the reason Campbell didn't have any assistants there and only had 7 guys was because, kind of thinking how I feel like a coach would think, it's almost like, okay, you guys focus on what you got to do, and I will be the shield. I'll take the bullets. I'll handle everything that gets thrown at me. You guys focus on football. Don't worry about the outside distractions. We focus on what's going on inside these walls and be, the best versions of ourselves that we can be, and not let any inside or outside distractions derail us from what we're trying to accomplish this year.
I agree, and it's interesting because I hadn't thought about it this way before you brought up, what you think his approach is, in this situation. But remember last year, young team, new starting quarterback, decided to have some open practices, decided to put them out in front of people more. Then you had the season where 6 one-score losses. The Oklahoma game was essentially a one-score loss until the interception. And maybe thinking the best thing for me to do with a young team is to, and then when you throw in the controversy and the legal issues and NCAA issues, probably better to shield these guys, like I said. And they tried that, and it doesn't mean that had anything to do with going 4-8, but when you open up more than you ever have, and the things you harp on in your program go wrong in so many close games and all that, it would be wise. And he's a guy I know that he always says, I take a deep dive. He gives a lot of thought. Did we do everything the right way? He might go, well, that's one variable we changed, and look at the result. How about we eliminate that variable now and take a different approach and hope for different results? Because, you're a few plays away from being 8-4, and I know people have said that. It doesn't make any, for a fan perspective, that doesn't matter. You still went 4-8, right? Yeah. But competitively, they were there almost every single game. And I'd like to bring up, because it's so mind-boggling, even the TCU loss, 62 points. Yeah, you finally the dam broke in terms of giving up points, but what was it, 377 yards they gave up or something? It's because of all the things that went wrong, like a special teams problem, a turnover problem.
Special teams.
We have a special teams coordinator now, so that's all going to be solved this year.
Yep,
that's right.
Never miss a kick again.
But I mean, that game kind of brought all those elements together in like an all-star game of lowlights, in a way.
Came to a head.
I've heard of those as a shit tornado. That's what that was. I don't know. There's the one last kind of interesting piece about it is, I think to build off the taking you accept criticism and deflect praise. Like that is the natural quarterback coach or quarterback, coach that does that. You listen to guys like, Mahomes and Josh Allen, like the new crop, Lamar Jackson, the guys that are the best in the game right now. That is the quintessential approach of leadership, because you deflect praise and accept criticism.
Jalen Hurts for sure.
Jalen Hurts, great. Like is the example of, hey, Jalen, you threw for 375 yards and ran for 100 yards and accounted for 5 touchdowns. How, what did you feel like during that game? It's really easy to do that when your offensive line is really good. Like immediately deflect praise. And then, hey, Jalen, you threw for 350 yards and got 4 touchdowns, but you guys still came up short. I mean, what did you see in the defense? Like, honestly, we put him in bad positions. We gave him short fields, and we didn't, accept praise, deflect criticism every single time. And when in years past, they've had this guy named Brock that's been able to do that. And before then, you have a guy like Lazard. And before that, you have a guy like Joel Lanning, that in the years past, they've had a person who all the players look up to and who naturally understands that concept of leadership, of accept criticism and deflect praise, that like this really young team, I don't know if they've got that guy yet, but with having a forcibly new starting quarterback, I know that's how JJ thinks. Like he came to our gym since he was 4'2", which was like, when he was like 3 years old, but like 4'2". Kid's a monster. But like, I know that's how he thinks. His skill might not be at that level yet. And I would imagine because Rocco's dad was a coach, that's probably how Rocco thinks. Might also be how Deckers thinks. I didn't know him personally, and you also didn't get to hear him talk much. But like, I imagine once the leadership gets developed from the quarterback position, or like Xavier Hutchinson was sort of that guy last year, but wide receiver, just by nature of position, it is a singular position where like you have a battle against a cornerback. Go win it. Go catch the ball. Make it like there. It is part of the team game, but that is the most individual one-on-one style of that. Versus the quarterback is the ultimate team facilitation. So like that guy has to be a leader. So it'll be interesting when Rocco / JJ / whomever, it's between those two guys, but it's very likely Rocco. Like I think he's like a 99%.
I wouldn't count Hughes out just yet. I think they might have some packages in there for him, but I think
packages, yeah,
yes,
not starting,
correct,
breaking down defense and stuff like the
land
ram,
that red zone,
the Joel Dozer,
turned around, yeah.
But I think that you'll have once that person has some success under their belt and gets looked to by the team as, all right, you're our dude, then I would imagine the availability of guys like that will open up. But I doubt, to your point, I doubt that it's just like open season, here's everybody, go talk to them. I doubt that that's going to be a thing, especially as you're starting to figure out who the leaders on this team are.
To that point, Campbell's been increasingly that way. If you notice, he's always been a guy that generally deflects praise. Haycock is a prime example of that. Whenever you ask him about any success the defense is having, he's like, that's all our players. That's their commitment. That's them doing what they're supposed to do and doing it exceptionally well. But Campbell if you remember, as the season progressed, I guess we have, chronologically it did progress last season. There were a lot of moments where he was saying, that's on me. That's on me. That's on me. If an execution issue in one of those close losses, it's like, ultimately that's on me. And whenever people praise the team, he kind of does what Haycock does. Well, our players have bought in. They're doing what they're supposed to do, and that's what happens when you have that type of player-driven leadership, and all that kind of stuff. So I think having that example, and I mean, to be fair, most coaches try to do that, but I mean, I think he's really conscious of that and a good example of that. And when you have that from the top, I think that will naturally, beyond what you said, I mean, Rocco being the son of a coach and a former NFL player, and Anthony and Becht and JJ, that can only help, inculcate that into those guys and make them, more of the I accept blame and deflect praise types of guys.
Yeah, and I feel like that, the quarterbacks we have in the room are very much more of a Brock type mold, where they're just students of the game.
Smart decisions. Yeah.
So, smart decisions. And, I think Dave Montgomery really set the foundation of what it means to be truly invested in being like, I mean, I don't know if you ever did it, but when I was never staying late on Saturday nights in the indoor.
I had to,
kicking.
man. I had to.
Yeah.
This foot speed ain't great to play running back when you're this big. So you got to get advantage elsewhere.
It wasn't the whole team.
Right. It wasn't the whole team.
Where Dave Montgomery was bringing in quarterback receivers, the other running backs, linemen. He was bringing guys in. Mm-hmm. They weren't hitting Welch Ave on Saturday night. Mm-hmm. And I feel like the quarterbacks we have in the room now are very much that way. And I don't know Deckers. I don't know if he was not that way, but I see the demeanor and the leadership that Rocco and JJ possess. And I think we're in good hands. This year, I'll make a bold prediction. I think this year we'll be okay. We might go 6-6, hopefully better, hopefully not worse. But I think next year we're gonna get to 10 wins. That's my prediction.
That's bold.
We have a lot of guys this year who are going to be redshirt freshmen or sophomores playing. We have a few upperclassmen. A few of the freshmen looking good too. We are still gonna be young this year. We're still gonna have our growing pains. But I think next year will be our year. And I'm not gonna just toss this year to the side. But I think this year, one reason why Campbell has kind of locked it down and buttoned it up is because it is going to be a growing pains type year. We're going to figure out a lot of things amongst guys who maybe haven't played a ton, or last year was their first year playing. I think he wants to get the guys refocused, especially with all the outside noise going on, and just really focus on what we can do, especially because we had so many close losses last year. We were right there. I think he's
Chris and Brent brought it up a number of times. It has a feel of 2017.
Yep. And
Campbell brought up, and I don't know if I was talking on the side or if he said it to everyone. I think he did say it to everyone, but my middle-aged or upper middle-aged
grizzled veteran
brain isn't always retaining information as well as it has in the past. But he alluded to 2016, and you think about. They got smoked while they were trying to figure out who wants to play in the program. They had that awful Iowa loss, and then a lot of close losses. And then at the end of the year, a really embarrassing loss to West Virginia. How are you going to react to that type of stuff? And you saw in 2017, presumably out of nowhere, and after the Jacob Park sunglasses and coming in and for all these big games, and then he's just off the team. A guy named Kyle Kemp that nobody had any regard for and hadn't played much college football goes and wins at Oklahoma when you're down big at half. And you build and you win close games, right? Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, holy cow, you've got a chance to, win 8 games. Whereas, people that looked at last year's team, which, yes, there were some newcomers, but a lot of the same guys that played after the first few weeks had learn from that and become winners as in the process.
Yeah.
Was 2017 the year that we didn't fumble? I suppose.
Hardly ever. Yeah.
Except versus Memphis when it was a fumble.
Air quotes.
I feel like that's going to be the recipe for success for this year. Take care of the ball, let the defense, do their thing. And we're going to have, a lot of 3-point wins, a lot of close games that we are just grinding it out. And yeah, I think, if Clanton can get the big uglies to be road graders, and we can just, march on the field. And yeah, I think 2017 is a great comparison because we won ugly games, won close games, but I think that's maybe how we have to win.
Yeah. I think we've had a solid hour's worth of talking about this. We have 2 more weeks to go before there's actually a game. So we're going to save some of this. So Rob, thank you for coming in.
Absolutely. Great to be with you guys.
It's good to be back. And I don't know, it's as good of a writer as Chris is. Chris writes emotionally, writes what he's feeling at the time. You write stories. And I just really enjoy reading your stuff. So I'm glad to have you back on the team.
Much appreciated. Glad to be back.
So the last thing is I think there's one sponsor we didn't get to, so if you guys are interested in strength conditioning for your school, go to goldfinchspeed.com. Lots of different options available for you. Just check that out. Grant, Rob, thanks for coming in.
Good to be with you guys.
All right. Check you later.
See you next time.